Okay, welcome to Gioco Podcast. Today we have the incredible honor of having here with us not just an author, but a pioneer of interactive narrative design. His creations, such as the role-playing game Dragon Warriors, the cooperative saga Blood's World, and above all, the revolutionary open-world series Fabled Land, have had the profound and lasting impact of a generation of kids and now adults. This evening, we'll talk about this and more with Mr. Dave Morris. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Ricardo, and thank you for those very kind words.
Thank you so much to you for being here with us. It's a true privilege. Dave, I'd like to start by transporting listeners back in time to the early 80s. What was in the air back then? What cultural alchemy created such a fertile ground for the birth and explosion of role-playing games and game books?
Well, it's interesting because it's one of those things where when you're in the middle of it, you don't really see that there's going to be a big transformation coming along. Role playing in the 70s had really kind of arisen from wargaming. And I think I was one of the people who was never a very committed wargamer, but I'd play a little bit. But it's almost like when role playing came along, I thought, oh, this is what I wanted. I wanted stories and characters as well as the gaming side. Um, And the interesting thing, it's like any revolution that there had been. I mean, I remember as a little kid playing multiple choice educational books where you would be asked questions. And of course, we had Choose Your Own Adventure. And in the States, they'd had the US Steve Jackson had
Yeah.
done Death Test, the fantasy trip stuff. But I think the revolutionary thing was that Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone saw that they could put role playing together with those kind of choose your own adventure things. And I mean, if it had been up to me, I would have gone straight in with an open world structure, like
Mm.
pretty much like the Death Test, like the fantasy trip solos in the 70s. And they saw that they needed to keep the linear forward momentum. I remember the first time when I picked one of them up, because I was working at White Dwarf, and I thought, oh, look at this Warlock of Firtop Mountain. And I got a few paragraphs in, and then I thought, I can't go back. And that actually surprised me, but it was one of the things that made it work. And it meant that, because otherwise it would have been, 5 times as long and a lot more complicated. And I think partly what was in the air was that interactivity was coming along and
Mm.
computer games weren't so universally accessible and they weren't pocket money purchases. The the early game books got into bookshops, and it was the same idea when I did Dragon Warriors. I think at the time, if you were going to buy a D&D, all the key D&D books, it was quite expensive. And I thought I want the entire game to be released in sections so that a 10, 11, 12-year-old can go in and buy it themselves and start playing. So that was the key thing, I think, that was getting it the thing. It was a perfect storm, if that's the right analogy, of getting these things to come together: interactivity, agency and story, mm, pricing, and the medium. Everything was right.
Mm. Okay. And in that context, with as you were saying, major established series like Fighting Fantasy dominating the British market, you made a professional choice that, in hindsight, has proven to be absolutely fundamental and almost prophetic. Instead of joining a big name, you chose to work with smaller publishers. Can you tell us about that decision and your motivations?
I think well, it was mainly for artistic freedom. I wanted to be, I wouldn't have been happy writing, I wouldn't have done very good fighting fantasy books because my heart wouldn't have been in it. That was their world. And although Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson didn't have a lot of oversight over the series, nonetheless, it was their kind of world and their tone of fantasy, which was quite different from the kind of thing I like. Um, and also, I knew I'd want to experiment, and that the fighting fantasy formula, because it's the problem of any, Lamborghini probably have this problem because being at the front, they don't want to change anything. But if you're way back, you want to keep experimenting. So I knew I'd always want to experiment with multiplayer and open worlds and things like that. So uh, I don't think temperamentally there was any choice for me. It was the only choice.
It was the only choice
Yeah,
to go for yourself.
yeah.
And uh, if you don't mind, I'd now like to delve into the architecture of your most iconic worlds.
Okay.
Um, uh, these are works that have defined an era and continue to be studied a lot. Let's start with the foundation, the World of Legend, born with the role-playing game Dragon Warriors. It wasn't just a game book, but something much deeper. What was the vision behind that design? And what were you hoping to create by introducing a deeper, more complex system to that audience at the time?
Well, I'd always thought, because I was a role player, I'd always thought of game books as a kind of introduction to role playing. So so when I started writing game books, I was thinking, well, presumably this will quickly move to being a role playing hobby in bookshops. I kind of was right that there was going to be a big craze for role playing, but I was 40 years too early because it's come along now that all my friends' kids a role playing, but back then it remained a hobby. But I was trying to get role playing to a much wider market. Again, a pocket money purchase, so that it wasn't something that was going to have to be really expensive and that only a highly because if you aren't already committed to, and if you don't know if you already like role playing, it's a lot. It was in those days. It was a lot to buy Dungeons and Dragons or Chivalry or Sorcery, any of those books. They all came in a box, and they were expensive. And I wanted lots of kids to try it.
How
And
much did they cost at the time?
that's a good question. I think I've got. Let me see. They were one uh, £1.75, so about
Oh,
two
yeah,
euro. €2 is that 2.20? Um, so you know, I think at the time, each D&D book would have been 25, €30. So quite a bit more.
yeah.
So it was
For a
trying to
kid,
reach
yeah.
a bigger market. And also because I don't, things like D&D, I felt at the time were very derivative of Tolkien. And they weren't true to any of Tolkien's work. They were kind of like the copy of the copy of the copy. And I just had a different vision of a very kind of folklore rich European style of fantasy. I always used to say Dungeons and Dragons was medieval America and that we really needed a European equivalent. I know we had the Strata Alga was a very good role playing game, but again, that was an expensive purchase. So it was really just trying to get it to a wider market.
Speaking of creation world, worlds are rarely built alone. In those years, you forged creative partnerships that have become legendary. I'm thinking of Oliver Johnson, Jamie Thompson. How important were these collaborations?
Oh, very much. I think of it like, I mean, a writer can write alone, and often what you find I mean, I'm talking about any writer, Hemingway even. So they were in writing alone, there are things they're interested in and things that they don't cover. And that can be the style of what they write. I mean, or take a filmmaker like Woody Allen. There are particular themes he wants to explore.
My
But if
favorite
you,
filmmaker.
Hmm?
My favorite filmmaker.
Well, certainly one of mine, sort of in the top three, maybe. Um, but he has particular themes he likes to explore, and if you're one of his fans, then you kind of go along knowing the themes that he will emphasize. But when you have a writer's room or a partnership, very often the other person gives you a sounding board that brings in other influences. So I'm not saying it's better or worse than writing solo, but it's different. It means that Oliver will emphasize ideas of atmosphere, and he'll often bring in a surreal element where usually my fantasy is quite grounded because I'm also thinking about the rules and the kind of mathematics of things. So his approach is really to kind of bring in the hallucinatory fantasy, which are a big part I think of the Middle Ages is to not just sort of turn time back, but to remember that the way people saw the world was different. Jamie's particularly strong on humor and story beats and stories that develop with characters that come in. So those are things that you'd have to ask them what they think I bring to the picture. But working with them, it's always it's it's a pleasure in itself to be working with somebody else because you're kind of sharing the ideas and they're all the other writer becomes almost your audience. So even say in Bloodsword, where Oliver had to drop out after book one, mostly until book five, but I was still talking to him about it and very much thinking of his kind of thing. Oh, even to the extent where later he'd look at a book and say, "Did I write that bit?" But I was thinking of your kind of idea when I put it in." So I just like working, with those partnerships. Leo Hartas was one of the artists, and Russ Nicholson on Fabled Lands. They both bring in ideas. Sometimes Russ would draw something, and he'd explain to me, "Oh, these buttresses around the city actually extend, and it becomes legs, and the city could walk." And Jamie and I were saying, "We're going to put that into the book. That's fantastic." But it was Russ's sketch that gave us the idea. So you get this great synergy going, I think, with a team. I just like working that way.
But you have to be friends
You have to,
to
yes,
work like
yeah,
that.
yes, and particularly when deadlines are close, the friendship can be strained a little. But we get through all that. Yeah.
Let's get back to the world of legend. The same world became the stage for Blood's World, a project that took a radically new direction, introducing multiplayer to a traditionally solitary format. Um, what was the philosophy behind it?
Well, again, it was my idea that you would have a lot of people who had come into game books. And increasingly, as it became a craze, I thought, well, you're going to get two or three or four people who all know each other and they're all saying things like, "Have you played the latest Final Fantasy?" So I thought, why shouldn't they sit and play something together? Again, it was a stepping stone to role playing. And I'm thinking, as they sit and they play the adventure together, they are role playing, but it's just a more guided form of role playing than you'd usually have, a more constrained version. But it gives anyone who played Bloodsword, I was thinking, would then know how to run a campaign in Dragon Warriors. So, and also it was kind of, yeah, again, I wanted to experiment, and I thought the idea of even things like giving specific information to different characters and that you didn't have to reveal to the other players is giving players the idea, okay, we're not just heroes running on rails, we can have our own agenda. That one character might have a different goal from another. And so it was, as I say, kind of a very structured way to present role playing, I think, in game book form.
And now to the core.
Mm.
Fabled Lands
Uh-huh.
was a monumental project planned for, I guess, 12 volumes. However, after the first six, the series was interrupted, leaving fans in limbo for nearly 2 decades. What happened during that long winter, and how did you experience the passion of the fan community that, despite everything, kept the flame alive?
Well, um, I mean, first of all, it's a shame that it was discontinued. The original books were beautiful. They, the I don't know if a lot of people won't have seen these, but the covers folded out, so you could actually have your ships manifest on your adventure sheet visible while playing the book. If you just laid the whole thing out, you had a what's the thing above a triptych? The four leaves anyway. But that made it expensive, which meant that although they were selling fairly well, the publishers were saying, "Oh, we're not making enough profit." And I said, "Well, you didn't have. We could dispense much as I liked the fold out covers. We could dispense with that, save some costs. In fact, I think they underpriced them. I can't remember the exact price now, but they were just a little bit more than a fighting fantasy book at the time. And I think you were getting, I thought, about twice as much. Well, more, in terms of replay value, you're probably getting 50 times as much content. And I think they could have been a little bit more expensive, and that would have made the equation work for the publishers, but it meant that they pulled the plug on us. And then Jamie and I were trying to at first get a computer, massively multiplayer version together. There were a few publishers we spoke to who talked about bringing the series back, but the fandom didn't really kick in until I think we reissued the books about 15 years ago. Then the internet had allowed fans to get together, which they couldn't have done before. And so it gathered momentum, I think, there. Um, Now, of course, people say to me, well, what's the end of the story? And I go, well, because it's open world, there isn't the point is a world, not a story in
Not a
that sense.
story. Yeah.
So it would have been terrible if, say,
You
Bloods,
create your own story.
you create your own and multiple stories, but I mean, although it's unfinished, it would have been a disaster if, say, Bloodsword had to finish after 3 books, because the story would have not been complete. But what I say with Fabled Lands is it's nice to get more books out, but we're really extending the territory that you can cover. We're giving you more world to explore, but the story is there anyway. All the stories are there. We could add more stories if we had more books. So we continue to look at options for how to get the rest of the series written. It's there are multiple different territories where we seem to have got fans in France and in Italy and in Germany, and so we're hoping for a South American deal. So all of these things could help. And of course, the Prime Games computer game version has brought in a whole new bunch of fans who probably had never seen the books, but they've
We'll talk
effectively,
about that.
yeah, okay. Um,
And speaking of new books of Fabled Land, Book 7, The Serpent King's Domain, was a landmark event for the community, especially even in Italy. How did you arrive at that decision, and what was it like to see such an overwhelming reception?
um, yeah, I was really surprised. I mean, I guess then we hadn't really grasped how passionate the fans were and how committed they were to wanting more books. Paul Gresty, I think, was the one who came up with the. He basically said, "I these are the storylines I'd like to." He kind of chipped away at it. He was saying, "What are your plans for what was going to go into book 7?" And Jamie and I sent him our notes from the maps, and then he said, "Okay," because I thought it could go like this and this, and he was obviously having lots of ideas, so he kind of talked himself into writing it, and then I think the idea of the Kickstarter probably came from Michael Lewis in France, who who said, "Why didn't we do a Kickstarter to raise the money?" Um, the biggest cost, I mean, because Paul and Jamie and I can write, on our own time, but we have to pay the artists, and so particularly cover art takes a long time. We had to find Kevin Jenkins, who did the original, all those beautiful spreads. Well, he now is a highly paid concept artist in Hollywood, so we had to get some of his time. And Russ, of course, sadly no longer with us, but I'm glad he got to do that one more book like that.
This brings us to the question that every Fableland fan has in their heart, and I have to ask you, what is the future of the series, or what can you tell us about the long-awaited Book 8?
Well,
I guess the loan and the level stands.
if book 8 were the same length as books 1 to 6, it would already be finished because Paul Gresti, who's working on it, because the book 7 and 8 link so closely together. So he's been working on that, and he says, "Well, I've written 700 sections." I said, well, that would be almost an entire Fabled Lands book in the old days. But he said, "Oh, I think it's about half written." So that's half written, and I can't really say much except that there has been a suggestion made for a team of writers, all very committed and very knowledgeable about Fabled Lands, to come together and help complete the whole series. And I've seen their proposals. They're really good. And we just have to try and figure out mainly what we would now do about the art. I mean, because Russ, as I say, sadly died a couple of years ago. And so we have to fight. I don't know how we'd replace Russ. I mean, there are other artists I love, like Leo Hartas, but Russ is such an iconic visualizer of the world. And it's interesting because when Prime Games did the computer game, I love the visual style they used there. A lot of people said, "Oh, it doesn't look like Russ's stuff," but it didn't have to because it was a different thing. It was a computer game. But in the books, we want to stick true to his kind of style. So that's the biggest obstacle, and finding, whether would we crowdfund it, or would we maybe kind of get each of the publishers. I mean, translation is another cost, I realize these days. But some, really, there's no lack of enthusiasm and talent. It's kind of just figuring out how the business part of it, the boring bit, works. That's the thing that holds us up.
Speaking of technology, many of your worlds have made the leap from page to screen. The digital version of Fabled Lands, available on platforms like Steam and GOG, has introduced the series to a new audience, a younger audience. What is your perspective on these adaptations? What challenges arise when translating an experience, in your opinion?
Well, in the
What
early
challenge?
days,
Yeah,
yeah,
please.
going right back, I remember talking to Ian Livingstone about adaptations back in the 80s or maybe early 90s. And in those days, they would do things like say, "How do we model the dice so that they roll on the screen?" And I used to say, the dice, we only use the dice because that we need a way of generating a random number. But the stories to me are real. I don't imagine dice rolling when I'm playing a role-playing game. I imagine the characters fighting or casting spells, things like that. The dice are kind of just a way of getting there. So it's kind of weird how literal early adaptations were. And then you've got the question, how much text should you present the player with? If you're going to put it on screen, it has to be less than you would have on a page, because we just read differently on a screen as opposed to the printed page. So I think Prime Games got that right. It's very easy to get wrong, but very hard to get right. And I think with the Fabled Lands, having the navigation on the map where you could effectively move the character. Interesting that was actually something I had said to the publishers early on. I hadn't decided in Fabled Lands whether you would navigate by saying, "Do you want to go north, south?" or whether you'd simply move the character on the map and you'd see a printed number that would be the next section to turn to. And so the computer game does it the way we almost thought of doing it in the book originally. And now, more possibilities are coming along all the time. Prime Games are working on Bloodsword, which may take a while, but I've seen some of the screenshots and it looks great. And particularly with the tactical battles, it's exactly what Bloodsword kind of was waiting for all those decades for, was to be able to move your characters on a screen. And there are other lovely fan projects. There's a very retro kind of Atari style version of Bloodsword that's just a fan built thing that's out there for free. And There's another fan who got in touch with me this week saying he wants to do a Commodore 64 version, so he's working on that. Um, so I like the adaptations, but I think it would be a shame if we didn't. I'd like to do the book as well because that's the bit I like to do. And although Jamie and I have both worked at computer games companies, um, when, for example, we did the Vulcanverse books recently, which again another open world series, um, even if they eventually get turned into computer games or massively multiplayer games or whatever, the writing of the book is a different. It's kind of like that's your development platform that you have to. For me, anyway, it has to start there, and then like Game of Thrones, start with a book and you can turn it into a game or a movie
Whatever
or
you want.
yeah.
This bridge between past and future brings me to an extremely current topic, which you explored on your Substack hallucinations and confabulations.
Oh yes, okay,
Your relationship with artificial intelligence in the creative process.
yeah.
What you can tell us about it?
Well, I have a very good relationship. I know that I think a lot of people who maybe there's that tendency to grab a pitchfork and rush up to the castle because you want to burn the laboratory to the ground. I think there's a little bit of and some of the people like Elon Musk involved in AI, I can see where people don't want anything to do with that. But I think the mistake is to just use it to think AI is just going to write the book for you or do the pictures for you. It's going to be bad if you use it that way. But um, I try to use it to do the bits of the work that I, you know, like a painter in the old days would have to prepare the canvas, for days. Now they might enjoy doing that, but I bet a lot of painters just wanted to get on with the painting, and they would happily get an apprentice to do the canvas. Get you prepare it, I'll paint. So it's really doing the apprentice's work to let me get on with the creative work. So, and the things I tend to use it for are reference, because with a very big open world series, keeping tabs on the entire, everything that you've got in that series is quite tricky to remember where did such and such a thing happen. You have to doing a word search through 5 or 6 books is kind of annoying. I can put them all into Notebook LM and just ask it, where do you meet such and such a character? And it will give me these 10 places. And I can say, what outcomes do I have? What are the code words I need to know about? That's just saving me time. It's just like having an assistant or
Assistant, yeah.
a genie in a bottle that do those things.
Uh,
And another thing was we've recently released most of the books as Kindle books.
yeah.
And I wanted to do that, but I thought I've got to hyperlink them because people do not want to have to turn through 20 pages. They want to just click on the number they're going to and go straight there. Well, that takes a long time to do if you're doing it by hand. I did actually some of the books by hand, and it's weeks of work of going through, putting in all the bookmarks. And then I thought, how are we ever going to get all the Bloodsword books, all the Fabled Lands books done? So I said to Claude, the Anthropic AI, I need a macro that's going to take all my Word documents and hyperlink all those things so I can just put them onto Kindle. It probably, it wrote the code in, I don't know, 30 seconds. A few hours later, we were able to put them all on Amazon. So, I mean, that's getting it to a wide audience. The AI has done nothing but good there because it didn't take a job away from anybody. It did a job that nobody would want. I would have had to do, and it would have been weeks and weeks and weeks of time. So um, I think I would encourage people to think about the ways AI can help them. Don't think it's just a lazy write the book for me while I get a cup of coffee. That's never going to work. It doesn't have human experience. Its ideas tend to be the patterns that it's remembered. So it will be the tritest formulaic ideas. Um, but as an assistant to do the grunt work, it's great. So I'm enjoying, and I like playing around with it. I find it each day I find another useful way. Um, I didn't realize, but that Claude, for example, can see maps. So I gave it some of my fantasy maps, and I was saying, "Oh, I'm just doing a bit in the." This was for a role playing thing. how long is it going to take to get between these two cities? And it can see the roads and it says, well, in summer, assuming you're making this kind of progress each day, it'll be this long. And it can even give me descriptions of what would I see if I look south, if I'm standing in the city and I look south from this point, and it will tell me. So yeah,
That's
it's
terrific,
very helpful.
fantastic. Dave, what's on your desk right now? What adventures are you currently working on?
Well,
If I can, if I may
the,
ask.
the next big thing I think is a little while ago, Pavel Ziemski, who did Stormweavers, and he did about a year or two ago the lovely box set of Heart of Ice, one of my books. And he came to me and said he was thinking of doing a Cthulhu um,
Oh,
game
wow.
book. And so we talked about it and we said, well, most Cthulhu game books are set in, the 1920s or 1930s. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense because Lovecraft was writing those stories when he was alive. So he wanted them to feel contemporary, not kind of 100 years ago. So then we were talking about The King in Yellow, the Robert Chambers book, and how one of the Repairer of Reputations, one of the stories, postulates a kind of satirical vision of the world 25 years in the future. So he was writing about in 1895 about what America would be like in 1920. So we said, well, why don't we do that? We'll take our world, but we'll do it 25 years in the future, and that will be our Cthulhu setting. So it's a near future Cthulhu game book um, called Whispers Beyond the Stars, and we're going to crowdfund that later in the year.
That's interesting, very interesting. I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of Cthulhu.
Great. Well, I hope we've done justice to it. I'm very conscious of the things Lovecraft said about the way what he wanted to do with his writing, particularly towards the end of his life, to create the real existential horror. And so we've tried to just not make it cozy monsters with tentacles, but to really give a sense of cosmic dread in there, I hope. But anyway, so we're going to do that as a probably as a print book and as an app, so people can again get the choice of which version. Oh, and talking about AI, there we did a little AI artwork, and we thought, well, we can't, people will not be happy with AI artwork, but some of it was quite nice. So what we've decided we'll probably do is we'll have a human artist and we'll have an AI artist, and we'll say, and the human artist we've asked to use a kind of retro style, almost computer graphic style. So the choice will be, do you want a human being doing computer art or do you want an AI doing human style art? And people will have the choice. So again, we didn't take a job away from an artist. The artist is going to get paid, but with the AI as an extra option, if you like it.
Well, okay. Will you continue to write for the Vulcanverse series?
Uh, well, I mean, that series is kind of wrapped up now because unlike
Mm,
Fabled Lands, that we've covered all the territory and it had a single story arc that kind of ends the story really. So if you play the whole 5 books, you'll come to a conclusion that your adventure is over, which that would never happen in Fabled Lands. You could just go back and forth forever there. Um, so I don't think there's anything more to be done in that case, but I've got another project that I'm kind of keen to work on. Jamie and I used to talk about it as a computer game in the 90s when we worked at IDOS. Um, and it's a kind of, a last man scenario. So you have the last person or somebody who's alone for whatever reason in an empty world. And I kind of love that feeling. You see it in computer games like Eco, and Mary Shelley wrote a book, The Last Man. So it's a great genre. And I want to create a game book in which there's real emergence of story. So rather than I mean, I like writing the little stories that you encounter in Fabled Lands and Vulcanverse, but I wanted this to actually end up with stories that I didn't program in, but kind of emerge from the choices that the player makes, more like the way a game like The Long Dark works. I've got about 50 pages of notes on that about how to make it work, what all the stats would be, and all the resources and all that stuff, and a huge story list. And we do have some art by Russ that he did a long time ago, which I'd be lovely to use because it's some of his best stuff. They're very different style from Fabled Lands. He's gone with a thick marker pen and made a very dark, almost chaotic looking series of images that are very nightmarish and striking. So I'd love to use those. So again, that's a project which I'm hoping to get back to later this year or next year. First of all, I'm doing a role-playing game called Jewel Spider, which is kind of a follow-up to Dragon Warriors. But I say if you imagine Dragon Warriors was the cartoon show, this is kind of like the much more serious, kind of a lower budget, but more kind of mature version. Um, so that's about three quarters written now. I've just got to put all the numbers in, basically, which is time consuming. But the other thing with that is the art, the original art, or a lot of the original art in Dragon Warriors was done by Leo Hartas. Well, his son Inigo is my godson, and he's also an artist now. So although he wasn't born when we did the original Dragon Warriors, he's now illustrating the Jewel Spider book beautifully as well. He's done everything as if they were, illuminated manuscripts from the Middle Ages. So he's done a version of the original Dragon Warriors cover, but it looks like a 12th century monk has done it with gold leaf and bright colors. So it should look beautiful, even if people don't like the game.
As a final reflection, why
Mhm.
do you think interactive storytelling and game books in particular continue to fascinate audiences, even in an era dominated by hyper-realistic video games?
Well, I think partly why do we read books when we have movies? I read a book because there's a degree of interiority and depth that I mean, I love movies. I'm a big fan of movies, but and games, but I can get from books something I just can't get from them. And I think it's again why I can put longer sections and more kind of dialogue exchanges into, say, Vulcanverse, which, unlike Fabled Lands, doesn't have ultra short. Some of the paragraphs are pretty long, and we can have long conversations there, which you don't want to sit through if you're in front of a screen. Recently Jamie and I were taking a look at uh, I won't name it. I was about to name it, but it was a follow-up to a game we really liked. But we were playing it and everything was cutscenes and long conversations. We had no control. And Jamie was saying, we could read a book, we could watch a movie
Mhm.
if we're not going to have control. And I think that balance is different depending on the medium. And in game books, people are like the game, but they also like the book part. There's a little bit more willingness to sit back at times and go with the flow of the story, where if you're leaning forward in a computer game, you would expect choices all the time. So I think there's always going to be a place, I hope, for that medium, that it won't just be replaced by, a lot of people said when computer games became more common, oh well, that's the end of game books, but game books
That's never
managed to
happened.
come back. Yeah, so
No.
it's a bit like vinyl.
Well, I have to ask you a question that I ask to every writer of game book that talk with me in my podcast. With such a vast wealth of experience, what advice would you give to a new generation of writers, game designers, and world builders entering the publishing landscape today?
Wow. Well, certainly this is a case of kind of don't do what I did, because I tend to kind of just charge into writing. People say, how much planning do you do? Well, in the case of the Vulcanverse particularly, I didn't do any flow charting until I'd finished the writing. Everything would be in my head. So I'd imagine the flow chart and then I'd flow chart everything to check it when I'd written it. I think this is not the ideal way to do. People should plan more. And I'm always telling people, write your plan, but I'm impatient, so I don't tend to do that. So I would say be willing to accept that part of the work can be the planning preparation part, not just the how many pages of, because I think I started out thinking it was all about how many pages did I get written that day. And that's not the only way of making progress. And I think a little bit more planning, because if you look at the different styles, Jamie, for example, kind of plans his quests like interlocking cogs in a machine. And I tend to wing it. I'll more like the way I run a role-playing game. I'll be thinking of something and I'll just have an idea and I'll think, oh, I'll bring that in. And so I'm making it up, which I love doing as I go along. But it does mean that the structure is a bit looser, which some people like, but it can be tricky when you then want to go back and check things. So if you can make yourself do the preparation and planning stage first, I think that makes sense. I would also say anyone today starting, right? If I was starting today, I would really embrace what I could do with AI because, and again, I'm not talking about using it to write the book, but the things that it can do, even in very tiny ways. I didn't use it in the writing of Vulcan verse, but in because it wasn't ready apart from anything else. But one of the very early things when I think it was Chat GPT 2.5 or something, so it wasn't very good. But I said to it, how would I describe a park in a Greco-Roman city? And it came out with it wouldn't be interesting prose, but one of the things it said was, you might see a fox. And I thought, now that's a very interesting point because we don't often see foxes in London parks, but in a park in the ancient world, yes, you might. And so I thought, well, I will put a fox in. So it did actually make one tiny useful suggestion. Now, as I say, there are all kinds of ways to use it to free up the drudgery so that you can get on with the actual creative part, and that it can be, you have to create series Bibles or world Bibles. And I used to have to hyperlink those, and they all have to be, methodically put into sections because you're really building an encyclopedia for your own use. Now you don't need to do that. You just need to feed everything you're doing to, as I say, Notebook LM or something like that, and then it's your Bible. So that's a huge advantage because effectively an encyclopedia you can talk to that immediately gives you the actual page you wanted. That's going to save so much time. So those are things I would say, yeah, first, don't be afraid of AI, but don't expect it to do anything other than help from the sidelines. Don't get it doing any writing because that would be horrible. But
Horrible.
using the AI, not being afraid of that, and planning. Those are the two things which I definitely think people that
Very, very interesting.
yeah.
How do you see interactive fiction evolving in the coming years?
I really am very interested in the kind of the character relation. Human beings are interested in action and consequences, but they're even more interested in other people. And lots of game books traditionally in the early days, because it's simpler, tended to be about, which direction do you want to go? How are you going to solve this puzzle? Are you going to kill this goblin? But I really like the interactivity that becomes, does this character trust you? The sort of thing I was exploring in Heart of Ice, which I was only do very primitively in those days, but things like tracking relationships so that the player actually feels like these characters that they're interacting with remember them and develop a relationship with them. It means that the villain will be richer because when you face somebody you actually have a history, a grudge against them or whatever, and the companions that help you will be richer because you'll remember when you became friends with them, how your relationships changed. Those are all things that I really like doing in interactive fiction, and I think
Interactive.
that's the future of it, really. And that's the thing that we're very hard to do, even with AI. It's not going to be simulating the nuance of character that a writer can bring.
Beyond Fabled Lands, is there another project of yours or an idea you have in a drawer that if you had unlimited resources and time, you would like to revisit or explore that?
Well, Jamie and I often talk about the our various ideas for games and TV shows that we would do with unlimited resources. Hmm. If Certainly, I think if we had Elon Musk's money, I mentioned him earlier, if we had his money, I think we'd do more interesting things with it. Electric cars I approve of, but I think we'd also be doing some really interesting games. Um, I mentioned already the Shadow King, which was the
Yeah.
project that we wanted to do this emergent thing, and um, so I think that's probably in the absence of several billion, that will be what I actually work on, and I'm very keen to. I don't even know if I can do it exactly in game book form, but I want to see if it's possible. I mainly came about because Oliver Johnson once was telling me about he was playing a game and he was describing a computer game, and he was describing all the things that had happened and how it had become very tense. He said, I was bleeding to death and I was in a blizzard, but I knew I had a shack with some bandages, but there was a bear in the blizzard, out there in the blizzard, and I thought if it gets to me before I get to the shack. And he was telling me all this stuff, and I said none of that was written into the game. It's all emergent, and he was absolutely enthralled by a story that nobody had. They knew that it was possible, but nobody had probably written it in. And I'd love to be able to do that in a game book form. So that's what I'm going to be playing around with next.
Okay. Um, Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
this incredibly rich and enlightening conversation. It has been a fascinating journey through the world you have created. And thanks again to you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Um, so I hope you will come again in a
Yeah.
next podcast. Um, okay.
Will you send me
So
the link? So
of
yeah,
course, I will send you the.
yeah.
Okay. So
I'll have to catch up on some of your other interviews as well.
yes, but they are all in Italian for
Oh
now.
well,
This is
you
the first one in
you
English.
YouTube gives me this is more use of AI. YouTube gives me a translation along the bottom, so that's fine.
Oh, okay, okay. So now I will stop the live streaming on YouTube. Okay, I think. Okay, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh,
It's quite a lot
uh,
to get in to pack in, but I think,
yeah, yes.
yeah, you've managed to cover 40 years very quickly.
Yes, but you get straight to the point for every question.
Good.
You get straight there. Okay, okay, Dave. I hope we'll see again. So we'll hear again. So I will leave you for the what's in your agenda this evening.
Oh, my wife's on another call, so I suspect we'll watch a movie, maybe a Woody Allen movie.
Oh,
Who knows?
which one?
Well, um, I think I really like Hannah and Her Sisters.
Okay,
Um,
one of the
Crimes
old ones.
Crimes and Misdemeanors is a
Oh,
very good one.
wow, with Martin Landau.
Yeah.
Terrific,
I
terrific.
think that might be my favorite. It's very hard to say, really. Even when, because I know, sometimes they're not as good as other times. I mean, for example, what was it called? Whatever Works, the one that he got Larry
Whatever
David.
works. Yes, yes.
Yeah. And I think, you see, the mistake in that, Larry David was playing the Woody part. But
Hmm.
Larry David, I like Larry David, by the way, but he isn't, his character, his persona on screen is curmudgeonly, and Woody's character on screen is likable and a bit harassed. He's a bit put upon. And I could see that Larry, if Woody had been playing that part, we would have liked the character much more.
Mm.
So, but he was by that age, he was too old to play.
Yes, yes, yes. By the way, Whatever Works is the favorite film that me and my wife watch together, because my
Oh,
wife doesn't like Woody Allen so much to see every movie of Woody Allen.
oh,
I am very passionate. I'm a fan of Woody. But Whatever Works is yes, the movie that we have watched.
does she like
We
that?
have liked, yes, 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 yes.
Do you watch?
And Midnight in Paris, even
Oh, yes, that's a good one.
Midnight in
Yes.
Paris.
Well, a lot of people said his later stuff hasn't been as good, but I've liked. I mean, Match Point I thought was very good. Oh, Cassandra's Dream I think has one of the greatest lessons for a writer ever, which is when Colin Farrell and Ewan McGregor's characters are have gone to murder somebody, and the guy's mother phones up. He's not there, and the answer phone says, "Are you coming to dinner tomorrow?" And it so humanized the victim. I thought they're going to kill him, and he's never going to go to dinner with his mother. It was the most awful moment, and it was so brilliant to give that moment. So every Woody Allen film has something to teach a writer.
Yes, yes. Even the last one, even the see, yes, even the ones that he had written in the last years.
Yeah.
Um, I like it very much. Okay, Dave, have a good evening.
Yes, you
Uh,
too. Thank you,
Thank you.
Ricardo. Take care. Bye bye.
You too. Bye.